Hi guys, welcome back to another video, or your first video here, I don't know. Welcome if you're new here, welcome either way. This is going to be my best books of 2023 video, and I really struggled to whittle this list down to just 10, and I really struggled to order these 10 in terms of actual order of my favorites. So I do have a couple of honorable mentions, and I've put those into categories which I will go through first. My first category is favorite comics. So I've tried to keep the rest of this list actual novels, but I had two comics that really just blew me out of the water this year. The first one being Words in Your Snare. This series follows a main character who can read other people's thoughts as words as they appear, and it's the perfect combination for me of really compelling plot while getting quite dark and serious, while also handling a lot of really important themes, while having a really well written and complex relationship. I just loved everything about this. It was so good. The second one being a last minute read of the year, and that was Murderous Lelland. What was the full name? It's got quite a long title. Murderous Lelland's Candlelit Dinner. And again, this one I had no expectations going in, but just swept me away. The art style was great, the story was really compelling, the relationship was really multi-layered, and I just loved the plot. Went in really unexpected places. It followed a lot of themes. It starts off where I really didn't know what was going on. We're following a down on his luck writer as he has recently got out of a relationship, and he bumps into a man sitting outside his door peeling onions, and that is how it kicks off. And it just went nowhere where I expected it to go, and I loved it so much. If you're into comics and LGBT things, I really highly recommend picking both of those up. The next one I own, so I'm going to go grab that. So my other category of honorable mentions is my favorite comfort reads. These I wouldn't class as technical masterpieces, but I just enjoyed them so much, and with the number of times I reread them this year, I could not leave them off. So first of all, we have Kill the Farm Boy by Delilah S. Dawson and Kevin Hearn. I've gone through the plot of this many times this year, given the number of times that I've reread it, but it is a fantasy novel making fun of the typical fantasy tropes. It follows a very typical fantasy setup and then just goes off in its own direction. We're following a young farm boy. He's designated the chosen one by a pixie. He goes off on his quest to find his destiny with his talking companion animal, and an accident happens very early on, and then a bunch of the other characters in the book have to go on the proper actual quest of the novel. And I just loved it. I loved each of the characters. They were each really distinct. All the interactions between them and the relationships that formed. There was a gay relationship that didn't take over the plot, and this was just such a delightful read and really worked for me humour-wise, so I couldn't not include this. The next one was How I Stole the Princess's White Knight and Turned Him to Villainy. This, again, is a not very serious fantasy novel. We're following a white knight where to the rest of the kingdom he has the perfect life. He is the loyal and strong protector of the most beloved princess of the kingdom, and she is beautiful and kind and wonderful, when in actuality she's a complete tyrant. Everything he does is to make sure that her whims don't hurt the people of the kingdom, and we start the book where he is trying to do just that, prevent one of her whims from taking out an entire town. He can't work out how to do so on his own, and so goes to the kingdom's most infamous black sorcerer in order to beg for his help. And this black sorcerer isn't what he expected going in, and they form an unlikely alliance, and then a friendship, and then a relationship. And just, this was such a comfort read to me this year. I loved it. So now on to the 10 books that I actually class as my favourite. Again, a couple of these are technically cheating because I'm counting a whole series in here, but hey, it's my video, so I can do that. So let me just grab the first one because I do own a copy. We are starting off with Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna Maguire. This is a series of companion novellas. I just love this series so much. It's become one of my favourite series of all time, if not my favourite series of all time. In this universe, we are following children who fell through magical doorways into worlds where they felt they truly belong. Think Narnia, Alice in Wonderland, even The Wizard of Oz. And for whatever reason, they've ended up back in our world and now can't cope. And in every other book in this series, we are following characters at a home where these children go to recover from their mental hallucinations, or actually wait for their door to come back or to try and find their door. And in every other book, we are following one of these magical worlds, either as a prequel to characters we've already seen, or if a character has found their door again, then a sequel. So yes, these are companion novels, and yes, each one is technically independent, but some of them do lead on from one another, so I would highly recommend reading the series in order. This first book has a mystery to solve. Someone is trying to kill off the children in this home, and I just love this so much. I reread the entire series in order to get caught up in this year, and it's just utterly fantastic. I really hope that Shauna Maguire just continues to release books in the series. I'm so excited for the dinosaur book, which is book number 8, 9. But yeah, this whole series is on my favourites list, but I don't even know what one I would class as my favourite of the series. Probably down among the Sticks and Bones, but I've given them all 5 stars. They're all great. Next is another one I own, so let me go find that. So yet again, we have one book representing an entire series, and that is Slippery Creatures, book 1 of the Will Darling Adventures. KJ Charles has just become an author for me. I have loved everything that I've ever read by them. They are just a master of the niche of historical fiction, where instead of being very fact-driven, relatively dry historical fiction, it very much features queer relationships and a lot of hijinks ensue. In this one, we are following the aftermath of the First World War. A lot of people have returned from the war with very little ability to cope, and we are following Will Darling, who has stumbled upon some good fortune and inherits a bookshop when a bunch of characters sort of descend upon him in order to get a thing that he supposedly has that he has no idea what it is, and he decides to try and solve the mystery of what they're looking for and why and what is it. And he enlists the help of Kim Secretan, who is very much the polar opposite, but maybe the person he can trust the most, or possibly the least. And just, I loved this series, and just, it's so fantastic. Next we have Sadie by Courtney Summers. Yes, this is a book that gets a lot of... Sorry, my dog is rolling around on my bed. Yes, this has got a lot of hype, but it is so worth it. In here we are following a character called Sadie, who is on a revenge mission to go after the person that she knows murdered her sister, and we are following a podcast host who has been tasked with finding out what is going on with Sadie in real time. This just was such a fascinating look at the horrors enacted upon women and the way that the justice system treats them, and the ways in which people can be tricked by only seeing one side of a person. And yeah, this is just fantastic. I really recommend. Keeping the mystery theme going, we have The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, or in some places it's named The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And this book was just so good. I would just recommend it to everyone. We are following a main character who wakes up in the middle of the woods, no idea who he is, where he is, why he's out there in the middle of the night, and he makes his way back to the house where he is presumably staying. None of this jogs any memories, and he goes throughout his day trying to jog his memory and meeting all of the people that he's staying in this house with, and at the end of the day, Evelyn Hardcastle dies. And at the end of the day, when he wakes up the next day, he wakes up at the start of the day again in the body of a different guest, and he is tasked with solving Evelyn's murder before he runs out of guests or before the people who are after him get him. And this was just so well crafted. I have read a couple of books which have the reliving the same day over and over again trope. This was the first one that I read where actions that he takes in different bodies do actually influence the outcome of the day by the end of it. And I had so many theories reading through this, but it was just impossible to guess everything by the end. I was, of course, wrong with all of my theories. And this was one I also really enjoyed rereading. There were so many little bits that I missed or didn't understand the relevance of in my first read through. And yeah, this is just such a brilliant book. Next, we have a book of short stories that just really did it for me, which is Queer Little Nightmares. This cover is great. And in here is a collection of short stories, poetry, lots of different bits and pieces, all about monsters and all very queer. All of the authors, I think, took these stories in very different directions. Some were very metaphorical, very much looking at how queerness can be seen as monstrous. Some were very literal in terms of the monsters that were featured. It was a very diverse book. I don't think there was a single story or poem in here that I didn't like. Some of them really icked me out. Some of them really made me think about how people are viewed in this world, and just, this was such a good short story collection. It was brilliant. Right, next we have a book that I don't own, so I will just hold up the book in the series that I do own. Let me swap that over. And so this one is A Court of Silver Flame, which is, I believe, book 4. But the one that I read this year and really loved was A Court of Mist and Fury. So this is... Does this make sense to hold up this one? Probably not. I'll just pop the book up on the screen. So this is a sequel to A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I don't know why it's taken me so long to continue with this series. So the first book I loved, and so many people online say it's the worst one in the series, I hate the relationship, it gets so much better after the first one. And I really loved it, so I was really worried as to what I'd think of the others, if I was going to really go against the grain. Also the fact that a love triangle was introduced quite late on in that book, and I was really worried about it. Love triangles are not normally a plot point that I enjoy in fiction, and the second book just blew me out of the water. The relationship that formed in there was so respectful and believable to the characters, and I loved the way the places where the plot went. I loved the healing that took place in it, and I totally get it. I am totally on board with how this went. I just loved it so much. Next we have A Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Craner. This is a book set in the world of the Welcome to Night Vale podcast. The podcast follows a fictional town where the paranormal is normal, and the setup of the podcast is that the narrator is narrating the news of the town. It's very light horror. I would almost call it cozy horror. I know that that's been a term that's been bandied around quite recently with the rise of cozy books, but I do think that very much fits this series. and this book follows some characters that we've met in the podcast, some new people. I don't know whether or not this is a book that would work for someone who hasn't already listened to at least a bit of the podcast to get some sort of initial information. I'm really not sure. If you have read this or tried to read it, I would love to know your experience with that. But I love the fact that the weirdness does so much to talk about other things. Like in here we have a character where her son constantly shapeshifts, and there's so much conversation about motherhood and raising children and being judged as a single parent. We are following also a character who is stuck as the same age and is sort of stuck on loop, and it's mainly a story that follows those two women as they come together to solve a mystery going on. And I just love this so much. I'm really looking forward to reading other books that both have come out that follow the podcast itself and that are set in the world of the podcast. Next, we have another short story collection, and that is Language of Thorns. So this book, it doesn't take place in the same universe as Shadow and Bone, which is the main trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. I was about to say Laini Taylor. I often get those authors mixed up. But this is almost a collection of classic fairy tales that would be told in that world. And this one, I think, means a lot to me because it was the biggest indicator that, yes, I liked the Shadow and Bone trilogy, but I think that the sort of stuff that Leigh Bardugo is coming out with more recently is really going to do it for me, because I loved this. I think that it was just the right amount of dark and sinister while also being really compelling. I think that she really does a good job of crafting a really good short story. A lot of, I think, short story authors, it can very much feel like a short story is just a beginning that cuts off rather than being a fully developed thing on its own, whereas I just didn't feel that about any of these. I thought each one was the perfect length. I never was left unsatisfied, and I could just see something like this standing alongside some of the classic fairy tales that we have now. I'm kind of running out of room in my stack, but I don't believe any of these others I have volumes of. So my second to last is Sword Heart. This has certainly been doing the rounds over the past couple of years, and I completely see why people have been wanting cozier reads. Now, the setup of the story doesn't sound that cozy, but do bear with me, it does get there. So we are following a main character. She has recently come into a fortune that she wasn't expecting, and her money grabbing family members have decided to try and get the money for themselves. They lock her in her own room, and the only way they are allowing her out is if she agrees to be married off to her cousin, in which case they get the money for themselves. She decides that if she were to die, then the money would go to her nieces, very much in the style of It's a Wonderful Life. And she is looking around the room at all the junk that was stored in there in order to find something to off herself with, and finds an old sword. She then unsheathes the sword, and a man pops out of it and is now her protector, and they go on an adventure. Just all of the characters were so compelling. I love the relationship that formed. We get perspectives from both our main characters, both the guy in the sword and her, and I can see why this is so beloved. I'm really hoping that this gets a cover update. I really would love a copy of it, but honestly, I don't like the cover. And yeah, I would love to see sequels following some other characters, like following the history of other swords. I know that She's written quite a number of other books that are set in this same universe, following some of the Paladin characters, following... There's a series like The Clockwork something or others, but yeah, I just love this so much. And lastly, we have the Dartmoor series. So this is a series of companion novels, but I would read them all in order to get the full context, because even though each one takes place in a very different time and place, we do get snapshots of different characters in the previous novel. So I reread the first two in this series, and I love the gay relationships that this author creates. They're so compelling and complex. In the first novel, we are following a young boy called Jack, or a young man, he's not a boy, and he has been trained his whole life to hide his power and to be used as a sacrifice to the monster in the castle on the hill, and he is going to infiltrate the castle in order to kill the monster and end the cycle for good. And I just loved it so much. I love the blurrings of good and evil. I love the multifaceted characters and the choices that those characters have to make. Each book follows a different main relationship, but also adds so much to the world. The second one follows fairy lords that take human sacrifices, and that one was very much giving a lot of commentary about being trapped in your situation and being so acclimatized to it that you perpetuate the ideals of your captors. The third book was very much centered around someone escaping from and healing from an incredibly abusive situation. It was just so good. And I know that in 2024 there's another release in that series, and I'm so excited. I think I have gotten through all of them, so let me hold up the pile so I have a thumbnail. Like, I had a lot more 5 stars than this, but I feel good about this list. And there you have it. Those are my favourite reads of the year, and I would love to hear something that you really enjoyed over last year, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.